Okay. So, so I'm going to start off with a little slideshow, and then we'll get into the physical practice. And if you guys have any questions as we go along, feel free to shout them out. I don't mind having a discussion. And Petra is going to be my lovely assistant and switch the slides. So there we go. So we're going to talk about how we want it to feel first off. And let's go right to the next one. And I'm using this is just an excuse to show off my kid's photography. Some of his photographs from Africa. But basically, we would love the upper back to feel connected to the arms and sort of seamlessly hooked up like animals and kids are, you know. And we'll just page through these, but you can see how the upper back, the little baby cub is inhabited and it's connected to the arms. Same thing with this bird, you know, you get the feeling of it, right? Wholeness. That was this guy, this is one of his buddies. But you can see the upper back is really fully inhabited. The arms just sort of flow from the belly. You can almost see how the legs and belly and back and arms are connected, right? And let's pause on this one. So, yeah, isn't he nice? He's got quite an eye. But the basic feeling I'd love for you to have, just as an intro, is seamlessness, you know? Like you have wings. And you're not even worried about your wings, you're just flying, right? Ideally, ultimately, we would love to have that simple a feeling. Your entire body is connected, hooked up, and everything's intuitive and automatic, right? And your only thought is that a mouse on the ground or something, you know? You're not worried about your own body at all. And that's what we're shooting for. That's sort of the word yoga kind of means that, union, right? Integration. But in order to get to that place, we're going to have to break it down and make it very complicated, and you know, so we're going to go through the whole anatomy of it, of how things are actually hooked up. And then we'll try to come back to simplicity at the end. Okay? Okay, so the few things that I'm just going to give you the straight takeaways before we jump into the weeds of it. There's basically three simple things. One is you can have a round upper back. It's okay. You're allowed to let your upper back round. It's kind of a key move. A lot of yoga gets taught opening the chest and unfortunately collapsing the upper back. We want to have as open a back body, an upper back, as you might have an open chest. I'm not saying you want to collapse the chest, but rather add the upper back to your already open chest. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So give yourself permission, especially when you are in structural postures that use the arms, to let your upper back round, because that lets well, we're going to talk all about this, but that lets your arms basically connect to your torso in a solid structural way. Okay, so that's the first takeaway, rounded upper back. Michael Phelps, right? Look at those armpits, okay? Now, it might seem weird to talk about the armpits, but last week we talked about the groins and how softening the groins backwards really gets you into the bowl of the pelvis and all the deep structures that are in there. Same deal with the armpits. Softening the armpits deep actually gets you into the upper back, the shoulder blades, and the arm connection. Also allows blood and nerves to flow better. So this is your second key takeaway. Deep, hollow armpits, okay? And the third one is that the breath can come fully into the upper back. And we're going to look a little bit at the structure of the lungs and see actually how much room there is back there. But I'd love for you guys to know, not only does the breath actually get into the back body, but it supports the back body. Breath is structural. Lungs are not just bags of air, right? They're actually sort of like sponges. And when they fill up, they pneumatically support your bones. There's actual stuff that happens when your body breathes. When you take deep breaths, you breathe diaphragm movements up and down, and the lungs actually spread the ribs up and down, side to side, front to back, and can literally support the vertebrae. In fact, you can using your breath, you can actually adjust your vertebrae. You can crack your back by just breathing. Just literally it inflates so much that it'll go clunk, clunk, clunk and get into alignment. Right? But those are the three takeaways. Rounded upper back, deep hollow armpits, and breath into the back body. So let's get into the anatomy of it. we're going to go from the bottom to the top. It starts where we sort of left off last week, or at the main point that we were at with the hips. Psoas major is really the root of the upper back. Okay, and this is the big, deep muscle that's in your lower belly, attaches your legs to your lower spine. But so we're starting all the way down here, and I'm going to bring you through a whole chain of structures that are connected to each other. It's called the kinetic chain, or one kinetic chain. It just means a connected bunch of things that move together. So, psoas major, and you go up the psoas. Here's the psoas again, and you get into this thing, which is the breathing diaphragm, right under your rib cage, right underneath your lungs. There's this dome muscular structure that moves up and down on the inhale, up on the exhale. And look at this thing here. This is the stem of the breathing diaphragm. The guy who did these pictures is Frank Netter. He was a doctor, and he spent 50 years drawing bodies that were chopped up. This is a real, human body. The only point is that he dissected Western bodies. In the East, the stem of the breathing diaphragm tends to be a lot longer, and this red part, the tendinous part, goes all the way down to here. So it's it's a much longer muscle. And the only reason for that is they tend to breathe more deeply in the East than we do here in the West. So when you can compare slides between Eastern autopsies and Western and see the stem is a lot longer. But the main point is, psoas comes up like this, breathing diaphragm overlaps with it. They literally touch each other and connect with each other. The nerves that innervate both structures are the same neural trunks and branches. So psoas is the breathing diaphragm. Here's another picture of breathing diaphragm. You see the neurology of it? You can see how it's attached all the way around the rib cage, so it supports the ribs from underneath. So you've got psoas supporting breathing diaphragm supporting not only the rib cage, but also the heart, which is right on top of it, and the lungs, which are all the way around it. Okay, and we'll look at all those things. So let's next. Okay, this is a cutaway look at the breathing diaphragm down here, and the heart literally connected to the breathing diaphragm. So one of my points is all these things are actually physically connected to each other, right? Psoas, breathing diaphragm, heart sitting right on top of it, okay, riding up and down with the breath. And the more of an excursion the breathing diaphragm makes, the more the heart moves and literally gets sensation, right? The more these structures move in the thorax and in the abdomen, the more the nerves that are on the surface of the structures fire. They're called stretch receptors. The heart has them, lungs have them, all the belly organs, yes?
What's connecting the heart to the diaphragm? Is it fascia?
Yes, there's a huge, big web of fascia around it called the pericardium, and around that the mediastinum. But also you can see there's ligamentous and tendinous tissue right under the heart. And there's a whole net that wraps around the heart. And depends what type of medicine you're studying. In some, certainly in the East, they don't consider that muscles and tendons and ligaments are different, or fascia are different from each other. And we're starting to come around to that perspective in the West. But yeah, so whether you call it fascia or ligaments or tendons, there's a huge, big structural connection. Think of it as glue, maybe. I mean, the heart is right there, bonded to the breathing diaphragm. They move together, okay? Now the lungs surround the heart, okay? Completely wrapping all the way around the heart. Here's the heart riding on top of the breathing diaphragm, connected to it, riding up and down with it, and the lungs wrapping around the heart, expanding, condensing, lengthening, shortening, right? But they're wrapped all the way around, 360 or 180 on each side. You might notice that the front of the heart, front of the lungs is the heart's sticking more into the left lung than the right. And you might notice that there are lobe demarcations. There are 2 different lobes in the right lung and 3 different lobes in the left lung. And just bear that in mind. We'll look at a few other slides of this. So we've got psoas, breathing diaphragm, heart, lungs, all physically touching, all intimately connected. Okay, here's another view. This is an actual radiogram from underneath, looking up at the rib cage, and you can see how big the lungs are, right? That's the main thing I want to show you. All the blue stuff is lung, right? Okay? You can see the, whoops, that's okay. You can see the bronchi coming down, spreading out, but especially notice how big the back sections of the lungs are. Here's the heart here, right? And lungs, big, especially behind the heart, filling out the back ribs. Okay, this is important for the upper back. Next. And here's another view, same deal. Heart is all the way up here. The front sections of the lungs are very narrow, right? There's not that much to breathe into up here, but we spend a lot of time trying to breathe up here. Look at all this real estate back here. That is all available to be breathed into. Okay? And we don't stress the back breath too much in yoga, but we should. And we're going to today. Okay? Let's move. Okay. And here's another view. This is from the back. You can see how big the lungs are, right? They're big. They're like scuba tanks on your back body. It's almost like you're wearing a backpack of breath. And notice how close the lungs are to the ribs. I'm just going to get in the way here. Look at the nerves in between each between each rib and each thoracic vertebra, right? So you can see how the lungs can or could, if they were inflating, actually fill out the rib cage from inside. The back, the upper back, gets filled from inside by the lungs. And again, it's structural support, right? Okay. And one more view here. Again, you can see how big, this is the back, this is the front, there's the heart, right? And this is from underneath. So here's that front left lung. You can see how small it really is. The right lung has more volume, but we're going to look at another slide that shows that it's actually not as much as the back lungs. And the two back lungs, big volumetric things that go right up against the ribs, right up against the spine, really sandwiching it, right? Tremendous support there. But notice this, right? This is the break between the lobes of the lungs. Back lobe, but this is called inferior and superior. But just bear that in mind. We're going to look at, I think, the next slide. Yeah, okay. So again, this is front, back, and back all the way over there. It's a diagonal line, okay? So that big, solid back lung on each side is all the way back here. This is a huge amount of volume. And the point is really that there's especially a lot of room to the lower back ribs, okay? Also, that separation between the lobes is major, right? These are two different branches of the bronchi that fill these different lobes of the lungs. So you could be breathing well into this lobe, but maybe not so well into this lobe. It's like a different section of your brain almost. So waking this up, breathing into this, might be less familiar. You could have a totally great front breath and totally absent back breath, or vice versa, right? But typically, since we focus frontally, we tend to be more aware of frontal stuff in our body than backal stuff. But we want to get into the back stuff, okay? Okay. And so we've gone through psoas, breathing diaphragm, heart, lungs, ribs. Lungs filling out the ribs, right? And we get a nice big round rib cage in the back, which gives us a surface for the shoulder blades to glide on. Notice how the shoulder blades have a curved surface, almost like a clamshell, okay? And they need that big round filled up space on the back body in order to glide. If the upper back is collapsed, the shoulder blades have nothing to touch, and they just flail around in space because they're not feeling anything. And that also goes for the upper back musculature. When this is filled out, lungs and ribs, then all the structures in the back body have something they can feel and glide against and be supported by and move in relationship to. Also notice the thoracic curve here, right? That's the natural curve of the spine. We want to let it be natural, right? You don't want to force a flat back. Just like last week, we talked about not flattening the lumbar curve. We also don't want to flatten the thoracic curve or the cervical curve. We want to have a natural spine. It can be long, right? I mean, there's no limit to how much space you could have between the vertebrae. But we want to let it be natural. Okay? Okay. So, when you have the back ribs filled out, and you have shoulder blades actually connecting to them, sliding around on them, that's called scapular stability. Your shoulder blades are stabilized. They're stable on your back body, right? They're not winging off. They're connected to it. And again, in order to connect to it, you have to have that rounded upper back, or they have nothing to connect to, right? You don't want to have a flat back and then try to smush, oh man, painful to even do it. But when you feel the upper back round and the shoulder blades connect, then muscles connect and they flow, right? There's continuity between them, right? Latissimus dorsi muscles, right? The lats and the trapezius muscles, the traps, big back muscles, right? Big giant blankets of muscle, really. You go all the way up into the neck, the side neck, and blanket the scalenes, the side neck muscles. And again, when the upper back is round and full, when the muscles can feel that there's stuff to slide on, then these big muscles relax, but they also engage. They become present, right? Not tense. They're tense when they can't connect, right? But when you give them something to feel, then they relax, but they turn on. Does that make sense? Okay. And just another little computer image of the back of the shoulder blade, the upper arm bone. It just sort of shows the flow of muscles. Rotator cuff, deltoids, upper back into arm, right? That's the feeling you want, that wing feeling that we were talking about in the beginning. Now this is from the front. This is really important. It's not just muscles we want to talk about. We want to talk about blood, vessels, and nerves. Look at these big branches of nerves. The yellow ones are nerves. Blue and red are blood. Okay? And this slide is really about the armpit softening backwards. When the armpits deepen, the head of the humerus, which you can't see in this picture, I'm going to cross over, but it's up in here, okay? When the armpit goes backwards, the head of the humerus gets out of the way, and then the blood and the nerves have more room. They just literally have more room. But that's really the goal of softening the armpits. Not only does it give sort of weight and presence to the shoulder blades and the upper back, but it also gives more room for the blood and nerves to flow. Okay? You guys can feel this if you take an arm overhead. I was going to do this in class, but let's do it now. Take an arm overhead and then take the other hand into your armpit. You should be able to feel a ball in there, right? That's the head of your humerus. Feel around in there. See if you can feel a round structure of some kind. Arm straight up overhead. Does that make sense? Now, soften it backwards. Round your upper back, lean back a little bit. You might let your chin tuck. See if you can let that ball disappear backwards a little bit. And then wiggle your fingers. What do you feel in your shoulder joint, in your armpit, in your hand? Does it feel like there's a little more room? Okay, let's try the other side just for fun. So all the way up overhead until you feel that ball pop out. And then soften it, help it soften backward. Lean into your upper back. Yeah, that's it. Deep into it, head can tuck, until you feel your back body connect. Right? It's a soft feeling, but it's a powerful feeling. That's the idea. Okay? That's just a little taste. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so like I said, it's called a kinetic chain whenever you're talking about one structure connecting to another and all the way up through a chain. And this is just a little homemade sketch. Okay, so you can see psoas, up into breathing diaphragm, to heart, to lungs, to ribs, to shoulder blades, to upper arms. It's one simple connection, right? And in other anatomical traditions, it's considered one thing, right? But the main point is, these things are literally physically connected. This is not an esoteric sort of theoretical, oh, we're all one kind of thing. It's literally, we are all connected. All these parts are literally physically connected. Okay? And notice how they follow the natural curve of the spine, right? The psoas is right alongside the lumbar curve. The breathing diaphragm continues that up and like a hood wraps around under the ribs. The ribs also echo that curve. The lungs fill out the thoracic curve, okay? And then the cervical curve at the top of the lungs relaxes forward so the head can sort of lift up, levitate. It's lighter, right, when you have the natural curve. Okay. And this is just a reminder that there's another one of my kids' pictures. That the stuff we talked about last week, if anybody was here, I know some of you guys were, how the groin softened backward and sort of allowed the hips to be animated and embodied, and got into the deep core, the psoas, which in turn supported the lower back, right? That's very much analogous to what's happening in the upper body, where armpits soften backward, lungs fill out the upper back, and you get into the big, deep structure in the upper back, and how that allows the shoulders to flow and be more mobile and connect to the arms. Same basic thing, and they're connected to each other, right? So from last week all the way up from the feet, thighs, right, groins, up to the psoas, and then the upper body takes over. And the whole thing, the whole kinetic chain is connected. It's really one workshop. We just split it up, right? Does that make sense? And then you get lively legs and arms that can move naturally. And just a couple more slides and then we'll be done. Yeah. Okay, just a couple examples of real people doing real stuff. She's embodied in her upper back, right? Can you see that her lungs are pretty full? Her shoulder blades are connected. Her upper arm is hooked up. Same thing here. She's got a nice thoracic curve. You can see the back body is really lively. And the point is that it's necessary, right? When you're doing something like this, you know, however many dozens of feet you are off the ground, you can't slip. You need all your muscles, and they have to be connected, and you have to basically be moving like an animal. And that's what it looks like, you know, when you're doing something with your whole body that's kind of a matter of life and death. Okay. And just one more slide. These guys are all like we've been talking about, rounded upper back, you know, connected shoulder blades, sort of flowing shoulders and arms, except for this one here, right? Wing! You know, complete disconnection. It's partially, not to beat up on her, it's partially just the posture she's in, right? But ideally, we'd love to see this posture done with filled out upper back and connected shoulder blades. It's much harder to do that, right? You have to have much longer muscles to do that, so it might take 20 years to get there, right? But
it's possible?
Oh, totally possible. Sure. Yeah, it's just harder, right? It's hard work. Right, it's easy to just flop yourself into it, but what happens is then you get the pinching of the blood vessels and the nerves, and stuff goes to sleep, and that's why it goes to sleep, because bones are pinching nerves and kinking hoses. Okay? Does that make sense? So doing it right is a lot harder and takes a lot more time. But it's so much better for your body. You can see what it looks like when people are moving from the feeling of that. I mean, these guys look like the wings did, right? This is Alvin Ailey, obviously. And you can see how the upper backs are inhabited, and the armpits are lifted and hollow. And there's a connection through the back body, right? You can feel it. You can almost see how the legs and belly are connected to it too, right? Does that make sense? Okay. And I think that's the last one, just a reminder of what it looks like. So that's my little speech, a little TV show. Any questions about all that stuff?
Can I just?
Yes.
I'm just having a hard time wrapping my, because we're always like touch, like.
Yes.
You know, for our, what do you call this?
Sternum.
Sternum, sure.
Up,
Yeah.
shoulders back down,
Uh-huh,
and that, I don't know how to round it when I do that.
That you're right. It's very difficult, right? But suppose you could add it. It's not like reversing it, but suppose you took that proud sternum and the shoulder blades down the back and also added a rounding of the upper back. Does that make any sense? You can see that? So you got this, and you got that. Now I have a collapsed upper back, right? But if I take my shoulder blades and spread them sideways, and breathe into my upper back, I don't lose the chest, I don't lose the sternum, but I add the upper back, right? And it just feels twice as big, right? You added the back body to the front body, right? So that instruction you're talking about is totally great. Don't have to lose any of it. You just take the other half of the body and complete. So you're round in both directions. You're high and wide in both directions. And you'll notice that there's so much more room for the breath. Right, it's limitless. You can keep expanding, keep spreading, keep lifting, keep rounding. Yeah. It's important to remember that the heart is round, like it's spherical, right? And the lungs wrap all the way around it. The heart is not just frontal, it's also got a huge back section. In fact, there's two different branches of the vagus nerve. One goes to the front, one goes to the back. And it's hemispheric. I don't want to get too much into neurology, but we got to do some practice. But just know that there are two different branches of your nervous system. One's feeling the front of your heart, and one's feeling the back of your heart. And if you are operating more from one hemisphere than the other, you might feel the back heart more than you feel the front heart. You might feel the front more than the back. But it's available to you. The other side of your brain can feel the other side of your heart. Okay? And breathing back there, inflating the lungs, filling the ribs, all that stuff will help you feel the back of your heart. So opening your heart doesn't look like this, right? Opening your heart looks like all the way around, like that. Right? Other questions? Okay, so let's take 3 minutes, and I'm going to pack up the stuff, and then we'll start with the physical practice.